All right, welcome to our session, Mobile Communication and the City. We have four presenters and we have one discussant. And after that, we're gonna actually open for questions and answer sessions. Each presenters will have 20 minutes to present. And when there's 3 minutes left, a student will ring a bell once. And when time is up, student helper will, where is she? Here. Yeah, ring a bell twice. So I'll let you know. All right, our first presenter is Professor William Dutton, Queller Professor of Media and Information Policy at the College of Communication Arts and Sciences at the Michigan State University in the United States. The title of presentation is Mobile Communication Today and Tomorrow. Let's welcome.
Okay, thank you. Thank you very much for the introduction. And I'm sorry, I think I gave you the longest paper but I will be brief and stay within my 20 minutes, so don't worry, I won't read the paper to you. This is different in two ways, I think, and maybe useful in two ways. One is I have done comparative research. I actually did a lot of cross-national comparative research on cable and other communication technologies and telecommunications. But I like to think of my work is moving more towards global research rather than comparative research. And so I would like to maybe raise that as an issue we could discuss later. And also it's collaborative, it's interdisciplinary, and not, it varies from the comparative studies of political communication, which tend to be relatively disciplinary. And this is very undisciplinary at the extreme. It sort of came about because talking to a colleague, gentleman from Huawei Communications and so forth, we got into a discussion, and technologists are always looking at mobile from a technical perspective. I mean, at one extreme, they've got guys thinking about the optimal design of an antenna for mobile and so forth, and how to increase the battery power of a mobile phone and so. And then you have social scientists, often who don't know very much about the technology at all, talking about the social implications, and they both tend to sort of stay in these little niches, not necessarily migrating into the other. And so I jumped at an opportunity to bring some of my students along. Jeanette Laud, Darja, Frank, and Jilly are my former students. And while I was finishing up at Oxford and as I came to MSU, we worked with a group of colleagues from Huawei, all technologists. And I was saying, I'm not even sure what's going on now with mobile communication, right? And they wanted to know what is going to happen in 20 years. So it was this wonderful discussion where they're not interested in empirical research. They want to know what's life going to be like and how's the mobile going to be used in 20 years from now or 30 years from now. I'm interested in how do we understand what's actually happening today. And this paper is sort of a result of that, where we're combining social research and technical industry developments, and also changing regulatory and policy structures to deal with mobile futures. And I did agree to try to speculate about the future, and I'll end with that. And it turned out to be quite fun, because I don't really do that. And even last night, Akiba Cohen was showing me new apps on my mobile phone. So I'm not exactly the mobile phone expert either, but I found this a useful exercise. The way we approached it was the following. First of all, there are a group of social scientists who really own this mobile area. They're the social scientists who do mobile communications research and found journals on mobile communication. That's not me. I'm majorly focused on the internet. But that's one of the reasons I wanted to get into this, because I think mobile is hugely important, and I needed to get my mind around what's going on in mobile. So we did a synthesis of the research that we knew of and could find on mobile communication. And we also did some field research. I had done a couple of global surveys in 2010 and 2012 for the World Economic Forum that looked at, last time it was like a number of nations, thousands of respondents, so that we could compare regions and nations in some cases. And I also have data in Britain from the Oxford Internet Survey that's over time. So I could look cross-sectionally globally and also over time within the UK to sort of tease out some ideas about trends and comparative differences. And then we did qualitative semi-structured interviews with a set of about 20 people who I regarded as expert either in the technical, policy, or social aspects of mobile phones. I just thought I would hit on a couple of things I found interesting that came out of the interviews and that might stimulate some discussion. One is this, what is mobile communication? It turns out to be a very slippery thing to define at all. First of all, it's not new, as I was reminded by a number of interviews. Mobile communication has been experimented with since 1918. There's some of the earliest experiments. And one of my respondents reminded me that when the Titanic was sinking, they were using mobile communications to tell them they're sinking. So it's not a new technology. And at the same time, now people like to say it's very pedestrian. It's a mobile phone and texting. My God, it's the new normal, no big deal. But I think it's really is innovative and continuingly innovative with such things as the mobile internet and cloud computing and Internet of Things. We like to think of the mobile phone as this thing in our hands, but it's more than that. It's the idea that it's married to cloud computing as an infrastructure is quite an important advance. And the Internet of Things, as you know, there's only, even if everyone on the earth has a mobile phone, that's only a few billion. And there may be 1 trillion things on the internet within the next 10 to 20 years. So it's an order of magnitude difference in terms of what we expect in the future. The other thing that I really gained an insight about is that one of the difficulties in defining mobile is that I defined it as a service enabled by a wide array of electronic devices and networks across a range of locations. Because you have this permutation of different devices, networks, and locations. And so mobile is not one thing. Devices, you can have a feature phone or a tablet or a reader or a laptop or watch, all of which could be the device that accesses mobile communication. And a variety of networks. We like to think of just a feature phone on a licensed spectrum, over-the-air spectrum. But actually, licensed spectrum is one of the least interesting aspects of what's going on with mobile. There are a lot of unlicensed spectrum using Bluetooth, white space, Wi-Fi, wired and wireless Wi-Fi. The biggest development in mobile phone development is wired connections. So the idea is getting fiber as close as possible to the phone and have as short as distance as possible over the air. And so that you have these hybrid networks that are really revolutionizing the speed and versatility of mobile. And of course, cloud computing, data warehouses are anything but mobile, but they are really part of the major infrastructure of mobile. And again, on the move, or a tablet is mobile, but often people just sit at home leaning back on their couch using a tablet. So there's some times where you're actually relatively stationary using mobile phone and not just on the move. And so when you combine location, device, network, the combinations are really huge, and therefore it's really hard to nail down exactly what we're talking about. So we have this growing array of mobile communication technologies defined by this combination of things. So, is mobile converging? No. I mean, the basic idea is many people view that, well, we just have this technological convergence. We're all going to have a mobile phone and that's it. We all have the same technology. Actually, my own sense is that we're having an increasingly diverse ecology of devices and networks and services. So the convergence notion of a single, I think, is less credible than this increasing diversity. Just to give you a sense of when we did the global survey, we asked people what they use their phones for, and you can see that the people who simply use a phone as a smartphone, that's less than half of the people in every region of the world. And in almost every region of the world, most people use it for multiple purposes. And I'll show you more about that. But also that this internet, mobile is not mobile internet, and mobile internet is not mobile. There are distinctively different things. I mean, there are feature phones still and that are not on the internet, and mobile internet is less pervasive than many people think. But they are really changing each other. They're really transforming one another. If you think of the internet, you can think of major developments that have changed the way we use the internet over time. Just in the last decade, search, the use of video. I mean, you might think that these have always been here, but these are really only 15 to 20 years old, or even less sometimes. Of course, big data and social media have changed the way we use the internet. And in the very same nature, mobility has changed the way we use the internet. And perhaps, according to one of my respondents, I thought it was a very well put notion. The primary way mobile has changed the internet is making the internet always available. We are always available, therefore, with a mobile. So as soon as you see something, you can tweet it or put it on Facebook or email somebody or take a photograph or receive a call. This always available notion is a dramatic social change in the way we use the internet that's being reshaped. And of course, it's because you're always available, you will say things and do things online that you would not do if you waited until you got home or waited until you sat down at the internet. So it changes the content of what we say as well as that. Another real debate in the area is whether the mobile is opening up communication opportunities or closing them down. And I think there's arguments on both sides of this, and I think the future is going to sort this out in one way or the other. The argument for opening is clearly that people have multiple devices. I mean, I often do research on internet use, and I find the sort of what I call the next generation user has a typical home now is, instead of just having access to the internet, they have 3 or more computers, plus they have 1 or more mobile devices, readers, tablets, mobile internet phones, and so forth, so that they have multiple devices that they can use on the move at times, but also in the home and so forth. So that you have this opening of many complementary technologies. You might use the tablet for watching video. They might use the phone for texting or email, but with all these sorts of specialized uses developing around different technologies, you might be adding capability, opening up the opportunities to do different things. The flip side of that is that if you look at the industry, it's actually closing in the sense that there really are now, even though we had many device manufacturers and so forth, that's declining, and there might be some consolidation. And there's 2 developing ecosystems of providers, who are the Apple and Google. And basically, each of those industries are developing fairly closed ecosystems. You have to use their standards and so forth to move into that ecosystem. And Microsoft to a lesser degree. But clearly, you don't have a wide open playing field. There's a variety of ways in which this is becoming closed. Moreover, the apps you're using are pre-installed apps, which is different from using the open internet and open search. So there are forces for both closing the internet and opening it. And I think that remains to be seen in which direction it's going. But I think the direction is closing if we move more and more towards the mobile as the center of our work. The other debate that I think is very interesting in the field is whether mobile is enhancing equality globally or undermining equality globally. The argument of closing divides is that today there are probably fewer people who have no access whatsoever. So that you have more people who have at least some access electronically, a phone in even a rural village with a windmill providing power. I mean, this idea of more people having some minimal level of access. And of course you have a very interesting case where people in the developing world actually are sometimes using the internet in more creative and robust ways than people in the developed world, and I'll show you in a minute. So in a way, there's some closing of divides, but generally, it's creating many new divides in the sense that when you have multiple devices, it's not just you have every household has more proportion of a household have access to the internet, but if you have many households that have 3 or more computers and multiple mobile devices, you've got increasingly layers of inequalities in terms of the infrastructure available to them, and not just devices, but also other infrastructures such as Wi-Fi and fast, high-speed internet access and so forth. So there are growing numbers of inequalities in the way in which we get access to mobile. You can see that the developed world has, in terms of mobile broadband, not mobile phone in particular, but mobile broadband, the developed world is clearly much more likely to be online in terms of being able to access internet applications than the developing world. For the best example here is this really nice chart that Robert Kenny gave me, which is, this is drawn from ITU data, but it says the proportion of broadband subscribers per 100 inhabitants, and that's by PC penetration in 2000. So you can see that those countries where you had a high level of PC penetration in 2000 are much more likely to have mobile internet access later on. So that there's a reinforcement of former inequality. It's not like mobile internet is reversing trends in terms of which countries have greater access to the internet or not. It's actually building and reinforcing those. But on the other hand, I've been writing a lot about the new internet world, basically saying that in many respects, if you look at the far right, the use of social network sites by region, you can see that in the old internet world, where the internet sort of began in North America, Western Europe, so forth, actually there's less use of the internet for a number of activities like social media. And the use of social media is much higher and stronger and more creative in China, Asia, Global South, where there's orders of magnitude higher levels of use for online shopping and social media. So in some ways, the new internet world are surpassing the old. I mistimed myself, but the social implications, I won't go over in detail. You know all these, you're social scientists, but it's really raising issues about what is the essential, because people are giving up fixed line phones now because they have mobile phones, and so we have to completely redefine what universal service is, what is the essential service. I think it's not, there's an argument by a number of social scientists that mobile is the new normal. Everybody just has and I think that's not right. It's become a status symbol and a tool of status and style. And therefore, everyone's differentiating themselves in terms of what they have in mobile phone. It's part of your social identity. And privacy, of course, is a huge implication, and I'll get back to that in a second. I want to end with the future. What in the next 20 years, I have no idea. But we gave them 4 scenarios of how things will develop. One is a seamlessly bounded ensemble. If you think of today, and you have an iPhone and a laptop and multiple other devices, imagine building on that ensemble with a watch and whatever, but that they're seamlessly interconnected so that everything's synchronized and your calendar will move across all of these. So you have multiple devices seamlessly connected in a nice operating ensemble. That's where the two ecosystems could move towards in one way or another. The other vision, which a number of people argue will be the future, is that the mobile will be a hub. It will be the hub in which it will wipe out all the other devices. You don't need a laptop anymore. Your mobile will project what do they call it with the typewriters? Keys? A keyboard, yes. You can project a keyboard. You could project a screen. You don't need all those things. It can be all of this can be handled with a single powerful hub. And the other is connected accoutrements, where basically wearable computing, where you've got computing, you're basically wearing the computing rather than having this everything in your mobile phone. And the final one is what I call the exposed device-free realm. This is my view, which is when you think about mobile, what is the dumbest thing about mobile? It is this stupid thing that you have in your hand. And I think it will disappear. You will not have a phone in your hand. All right? You probably all have cars, or many of you have a car, where if you have a mobile in your purse or in your briefcase, you can talk to your car, and it knows where you were there. You can have a voice conversation. You could do anything you need to do by voice through your car. Well, that will happen everywhere, because through what you are censored with, we will know where you are. We can communicate. I can communicate by voice or hear what you're doing and so forth. So that this idea of a device-free future communication is the future. And that's it. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Professor William Dutton. Our next presenter is Professor Ingrid Volkmar, Associate Professor at the School of Culture and Communication, Faculty of Art from the University of Melbourne, Australia. The paper is titled Parameters of Public Deliberation in Transnational Communicative Terrains.
And can I have my slides? First one. Yeah, thank you. Well, good morning, everyone. I would like to contribute to the debate we have had yesterday, and maybe what William said this morning as well, in a sort of conceptual way. And I have an old-fashioned manuscript, I must say, and I'm going to talk about, what I think is a quite important issue. It's public communication, deliberation in these new forms of connectivity across mobile phones, across digital worlds, across social media, and across systems we've talked about yesterday. And my topic is parameter of public deliberation and transnational communicative terrains, and I would like to just chart some major strands of these forms of public communication. In his book, The Public and Its Problems, John Dewey remarked that in no two ages or places is there the same public. Dewey's observation, made in the early decades of the 20th century, relates to the transformation of the public sphere at a time where the traditional centrality of vibrant community public life in the US was still functional, but, and this is Dewey's point, already slowly dissolving. The traditional public life of local places, of town hall communities, was merging with larger, more centralized forms, which now began to ventilate public debate and shape public opinion, no longer as a local community reasoning, but in larger national mediated scopes. About 40 years later, Jürgen Habermas has identified a second major shift of public spheres, which now relates specifically to modern European nation states. In this lens, the shift of public discourse towards further manufactured publicity and away from reasoned publicness has made room for strategically produced publicity of private interests. Such a second shift of mediated public spheres has significantly weakened the public as a critically debating entity and, most importantly, as a regulating deliberative force, as Habermas argued. Nancy Fraser, 1992, suggests to reposition public spheres again, not only within private and public discourse domains, but as segmented or fractured publics. Fraser proposes a dichotomy of weak and strong public discourse. Strong publics are those, quotation, whose discourse encompasses both opinion formation and decision making, meaning achieving legally binding decisions, and in weak publics, deliberative practice consists exclusively in opinion formations. These and many other carefully drafted notions of public spheres oscillate around the dialectic of private and public, weak and strong, fractured and mainstream, online and offline spheres, and have made important contributions to our understanding of the transformed parameter of recent public debate vis-à-vis nationally bounded formations of normative consent, legitimacy, and accountability. However, these conceptions of public spheres seem to be no longer sufficient for assessing the parameter of democratic deliberations in today's non-national, non-territorial, fluid publics which emerge as multidirectional discourse spheres of threats, a communicative matrix disembedded from the traditional dialectic of public formations. These deliberative spheres emerge beyond the modern model of publicness, beyond the boundedness of national territories, and beyond nationally bounded legitimacy regimes. The boundedness of these procedural mechanisms of public deliberation have become porous for decades, and the holes are widening fast. Although nation states will not disappear, national public communicative space is, if we like it or not, increasingly disembedded, seamlessly streamed between servers shared by peer-to-peer networks in real time across all continents. As Saskia Sassen has remarked, this was in 2006, the nation is the site of globalization. Communication infrastructures and not only reach across all world regions, but have gained an unprecedented globalized complexity. Hundreds of satellites, the exact number is unknown as satellites are only on the periphery of our research agenda, constitute the core backbone of our communicative infrastructure. How do I get to the next slide? Okay. In the early days of international communication in the 1960s, satellites delivered television, radio, telephony from the global north to the south. Today, satellites are multi-level platforms and operate no longer mainly in patterns of big footprint patches, like this, the old satellite footprint patch, but point-to-point communication and deliver thousands of content channels, internet, broadband, data transfer, and cloud communication to server networks located in all world regions. Latest generations of satellites, so-called EPIC satellite technology, and this is the latest version which will be launched next year, or this year and next year. These are called EPIC satellites, which just emerged this year, are a completely new pattern of even finer microgrids, precise links for data mobility across multiple screens, helping us to stay connected while we move around the world. Google and Facebook will launch drones in the next year to reach even the remotest world regions. These giga corporations operate in the gray zones of regulatory no man's land, in wide open spaces between traditional bounded polities from antitrust to copyright, and are unstoppable in their expansion into even further domains of our individual communicative worlds. Or in a Habermasian term, these are communicative systems which colonize, interpenetrate our life world spheres wherever we are in the world. Facebook has 1.3 billion users, more than the population of many states, and Facebook's CEO Mark Zuckerberg understands these shifts as an indicator for a new geopolitical order where, as he argued in the Financial Times, the world is moving from countries to companies. Based on these complex infrastructures targeting the spectrum of subjective mobility it is not surprising that for today's youth generation, centers and peripheries of public communication no longer exist. Youth living in peripheries, such as in our Australian neighboring country Papua New Guinea, which has until recently been one of the most secluded countries worldwide, now seamlessly engage with their peers on small islands deep in the Pacific Ocean, as well as in New York, London, and Nairobi. Today's youth generation perceive public spheres as a simultaneous, always-on digital screen universe. When reviewing these deep-seated transformations, it seems that traditional paradigms of what Terry Rantanen describes as methodological internationalism, and I would like to add methodological globalism, are no longer suitable for illuminating the key domains of deliberative communication. There is no inter or trans anymore. It is a globalized communicative matrix, continuously and simultaneously accessible from all world regions. Within such a matrix, public communication appears no longer as a sphere, but as lines of subjective cartographies meandering across intentionally chosen sites of interest of peer-to-peer loyalties and agencies. Within such a matrix, civic identity is no longer, as Castells once argued, situated between the self and the net, within the framework of large-scale network conceptions, but in the reflective spectrum of a subjective centralization of decentrality, producing a subjective universe of local, national, transnational flows, which are continuously negotiated in notions of shifting centers and peripheries, from youth protests in remote places of rural Tunisia, which sparked the Arab Spring, to connected Occupy activism to Iran and recently Hong Kong, as we all know. First parameter of such a reflective sphere within a globalized communicative matrix are appearing in outcomes of our international comparative study on global youth and media, notions of cosmopolitanism in the global public space, which will be concluded at the end of this year. We have asked more than 6,000 14 to 17-year-olds in 9 countries how they use media, how they construct globalization and perceive civic identity. Results show the intensity of merging of local, national, and globalized communication forms. Television is the preferred medium for news. That Akiba will be pleased to hear this. For news in a parallel universe, however, with Google, MSN, Yahoo, etc., where they actively engage, search for news, upload, etc. Responses reveal a relatively large degree of political interest in Japan, Germany, and South Africa and Kenya. However, findings also show interesting axes across all society types, which have made us label this generation the generation of in-betweeners, situated between skepsis and trust, between notions of globalized risks and a strong sense of world insecurity. When asked if they feel that the world today has become more insecure than at the time when their parents were young, 80% agree. It is not surprising that about 50% of the sample consider international political events more important than national and articulate a continuous live parallelism of national and global citizenship. This is the chart that reveals across all the countries the degree of how they feel citizens of the world and citizen of my country. The red is citizens of the world and the blue is citizen of my country, and you see interesting parallelism and interesting shifts, and I can't go into any details, unfortunately. They distrust international politicians, however, retreat to the engagement in larger globalized political spheres, such as environment, human rights, economy, wealth, and poverty. These are fine contours of interdependent public horizons among today's youth generation, which are, and this is important to realize, no longer central to the democratic nation state. They are no longer central to other societies as well. Reviewing these phenomena seems to reveal a public sphere which is no longer porous, but is disembedded itself. As Axel Bruns has argued, the public sphere is decentralized across the network itself, a pan-societal environment experienced and lived by citizens themselves. It is a transformation towards subjective access, determining and selecting engagement in a globalized interdependent sphere of chosen network formations which require a new understanding of angles of deliberation within a new reflexive spectrum meandering across all society types. Conceptions of deliberative discourse have recently emerged which assess the enlarged dynamic communicative space of technology-centered interaction, and due to this lens are sometimes understood as a somewhat one-dimensional sphere of specific digital or online deliberation. That's how we research these areas. We basically just look at these secluded options. Quite often the ideal of traditions of rational deliberative discourse is broadly adopted in these one-dimensional network contexts, and in consequence it is assumed that deliberative network engagement is either an alternative sphere of deliberation or, due to the boundedness of this ideal model, restricted to a territorially or nationally shared space. However, it is necessary to broaden the frameworks of deliberation in context of structures of interdependences, structures of epistemic interdependence we've just seen here, where the common good is shifting within secluded horizons of public cartographies. The discursive process of negotiating individual and collective judgments as reason-based agreements is no longer related to a bounded civic collective, but fluctuating across thematic spaces and loyalties of broad, unbounded communicative spheres which articulate new types of normative structures. Deliberative spaces are ingrained in these fluid public interdependent geographies of dynamic symmetrical networked spheres where normative consent shifts along centrality and peripheries around communities, events, and conflicts. Deliberative spheres within new spaces of in-betweenness, no longer between citizens and the state, but between digital engagement of choice, the like it, click and follower stream, and live world locality. Such an unfolding interdependent dimension of public deliberation is only on the surface a space of social media or digital communication. It is a multi-layered spectrum of chosen, authentic communicative forms incorporated in traditional local dimensions of deliberative cultures, which are now embedded in deliberative public practices across geographies of networked spheres. There are different examples for this, and I've developed a model of virtual activism, for example, which is a form of deliberative spheres within these new forms of interconnectivity, which means that for example, virtual activism is intensifying publicness through simultaneously enhancing geographically dispersed local discourse across transnationally accessible platform centers activism. Examples are post-election conflicts in Iran, the Green Revolution, etc. And I think we all know many examples of these forms of deliberative. Ushahidi is a website, as you know, where people can connect and report and upload live conflict communication and conflict streams, etc., etc. So there are numerous examples for these sorts of deliberation. So reviewing all of this suggests that the core shift takes place by disentangling the Habermasian core domains of deliberation, deliberative discourse, validation and verification from the spheres of congruent direct interaction in the medium of a reasoned engagement towards a connected subject, holding the control screens of reflexive discourse across chosen spheres of participation, validation, and verification, which used to be centered within a nation state, and that these three angles or discursive angles are now spread across the world. So we watch news streaming on the internet from one world region, we live in another world region, vote maybe in another world region, and so on. We all live these mobile lives, and these forms of validation, verification, and discourse are really spread horizontally, no longer embedded within one nation. And these domains are scattered, as I said, across digitally available options, across the communicative metrics. What I just said, I can engage live on Facebook with local NGOs in South America, validate outcomes with Greenpeace archives in Amsterdam, and verify on Twitter sites by engaging with the chair of the International Panel on Climate Change as an outcome, vote for the Green Party in Germany. Nuanced dimension of the reallocation of the Habermasian core domains of deliberation along such a horizontal stretching process become visible when assessing conceptions of what we might call decoupling processes of modern state society nexus, which have been addressed, for example, in sociology and political science for some time. This is what we've discussed, I think, briefly or touched upon briefly yesterday in these areas. The debate about these forms of decoupling of the state-society nexus of, in a way, also public spheres from the state has been addressed much earlier than in our discipline. I just remind you of debates of civil society like Mary Kaldor, of other political scientists such as Ferguson Mansbach, who have argued already in 2004, when in our field we didn't even start to address these issues, that state-centric theories and models account for only a small part of what happens in the world, and at worst are devices built on sand as the interstate epoch is drawing to a close. Also, of course, globalization debates, reminding you of Anthony Giddens' work, Ulrich Beck's work, and so on, have pointed towards these sort of decoupling processes of publics in the context of risk communication, in the context of cosmopolitan communication, and so on. And I won't go into details with this. What I would like to suggest, and at the end of my talk, is really to look across these spheres, maybe with a new in a new framework. And the only framework, honestly, which I could come up with is to look at networks no longer as a technological platform, but as epistemic spheres or spheres of discourse. So what I would like to suggest is maybe a distinction between network centrality of networks, because we need to understand the way how we, through these links and through these debates, monitor what's going on in the world and how we engage in the world. And these might not always be the same networks we engage with. So what I would like to suggest is take the idea of a network further and not just look at it as a technological, what William pointed out this morning, a technological device, but rather as an epistemic sphere, and move away from networks as a platform in a way to networks as discourse spheres, and how we negotiate between these different angles we relate to. So these are some ideas about the publics, and I'm sorry about the theoretical conceptions, but I think we have to go back to Habermas and discuss this in some more length, and I'm really sorry for that. All right, thank you.
Thank you, Professor Ingrid Volkmar. Our next presenter is Professor Jack L.C. Chu. He's an associate professor at the School of Journalism and Communication at the Chinese University of Hong Kong. The paper is titled The City and the Grassroots Mobilized, Notes and Questions from Asia Pacific.
Yes, I changed my presentation last night. Because this talk is based on my speech at ICA Regional Conference in Brisbane last year, so I changed it also specifically for those who listen to me in Brisbane in order not to bore you again. So I added new content on comparative communication research, CCR, on action plans to move beyond this stage of pure thinking. So I'm sharing a think piece today, indeed. And of course, on I have a new title here, in dialogue with Manuel Castells, The City and the Grassroots. My focus is on urban social movements. After yesterday's wonderful discussions, I'd like to make a humble provocation. That is, when it comes to our understanding of mobile communication and the city, we can consider events of social movements as the default unit of comparison. Why? Let me explain. Urban social movements have received much scholarly attention since the so-called Twitter revolution of 2009, Arab Spring of 2011, and the umbrella movement of 2014. What seems to be missing in this growing body of literature is a deeper historical analysis. So I think Ingrid would agree with me on that. And B, sufficient attention to social and political factors that are not technological. Fortunately, this pattern has just begun to change with Alexandra and Bassiani's bread, freedom, social justice, workers, and the Egyptian revolution recently. But if we take a step back from mobile media, studies of urban social movements have been a field with rich historical and sociological analysis, such as this classic volume by Castells, published in 1983. Here, he argues against conventional Marxism for it reduces social movement studies into orthodox class analysis. He maintains, only by focusing on the interaction between the social dynamics of class struggle and the urban dynamics, whose content must be redefined in each historical situation, are we able to understand social change in a comprehensive manner, end quote. Reflecting from the Asia Pacific, I see the pendulum moving towards the opposite direction today. While Castells worried about too much class analysis 3 decades ago, my take is that social movement researchers, including in CCR, pay too little attention to issues of social class. Bringing class back in shall not only enrich our understanding of the city and the grassroots under new technological conditions of the mobile internet, it shall make CCR more comprehensive, more systematic, more historical, and more likely to export findings and theoretical advancements to other fields, from urban studies to political science, even sociology. When sociologist Barry Wellman coined the term mobilization in 2001, he was discussing the diffusion of mobile phone, its role in reinforcing, quote, mobile lifestyles and physically dispersed relationships, and its affording liberation from both place and group, end quote. The term was quickly extended to refer to mobile phones used in social movement mobilization, for example, by Howard Rheingold and Castells et al., who discussed mobilization as a process leading also to fundamentally new social and political dynamics, be they smart mobs or instant communities of practice. Interesting is to consider how the city is being changed when the grassroots, the underclass, what I call the information have less, i.e. those get connected through working class ICTs, all have their mobiles at times of social movement. Also interesting is to note that both Rheingold's Shibuya Epiphany and Castells' mobile civil society began with heavy reference to developments in the Asia-Pacific region. The success story of NTT Docomo in Japan, Generation Text and the People Power 2 movement in Manila, that's the image above. When in 2001, Joseph Estrada, the Philippine president, was ousted by SMS-empowered demonstrators. This was soon followed by the unprecedented triumph of Roh Moo-hyun in 2002 Korean presidential election, marking the world's first 2 instances of mobilization that result in national leadership change. These were not the only instances of mobilization at the turn of century. During the anti-WTO Battle of Seattle, Nextel mobile phones were used to coordinate protests. Bottom left is our charging station for those Nextel phones in 1999. A decade later, we have more advanced charging stations for mobile phones. Okay, this one at the bottom is from the umbrella movement, when a Hong Kong occupier could enter her mobile phone number to retrieve her phone after charging. Okay, so that's the bottom image. Mobile-equipped Taiwanese youth continued the momentum of the Sunflower movement in pressurizing Taipei and influencing election results, which we heard about yesterday. The most remarkable triumph in 2014 of mobilized grassroots in the Asia-Pacific is, by the way, not in Hong Kong or Taiwan. It was in Indonesia. As the Obama of Jakarta won the presidency, There, as in South Korea, like in South Korea a dozen years ago, digital media helped pro-grassroots politicians win national elections, be they Jokowi or Roh Moo-hyun. But this is only one side of the moon. In Thailand, as in the Philippines, political upheavals also undermined supposedly pro-poor politicians, be they Yingluck or Estrada. Elsewhere, pro-business candidates won elections too. Don't forget, for example, the Modi administration in India. Indeed, the relationship between mobilization and grassroots empowerment is rather messy. Meanwhile, the enthusiasm for a mobile-based informational city that serves the grassroots seems to have declined in this region. Before the umbrella movement, researchers in the Asia-Pacific had been looking to the Arab Spring and the Occupy movement in Western cities for inspirations in applying mobile communication to the pursuit of a more democratic city. This does not have to be the case. Here is my take. Although technological change is not always associated with immediate movement goals, such as regime change or policy adjustment, more profound change happens in a deeper cultural level in using mobiles to redefine quote-unquote urban meaning, by which Castells means the structural performance assigned as a goal to cities in general by the conflictive process between historical actors in a given society, end quote. This is particularly so in the Asia-Pacific more than any other world region today, I would argue, because here we see a resurgence of the working classes as historical actors, now mobilized. Some colleagues, students, and I myself sometimes forget the special role of our region in the world economy today. While the rest of the world had gone through a decline of the working class, due mostly to increasing unemployment, the low-paying jobs have come to the Asia-Pacific. Hence, we have China taking care of manufacture for the world, and also India taking care of service and software. Prosperity in this region of ours, very much fueled by the leaps and bounds of global digital media industry, has to be seen as a fig leaf of the capitalist world economy since 2008, where recession is the rule, prosperity the exception. What we have in our region now is a double great leap forward, both the industrial and the informational, both the urban and the mobile. This is probably the most distinct condition for many large Asian cities today, which is hard to find elsewhere. On the left is a data visualization. China used more cement in 3 years, from 2011 to 2013, compared to the amount used in the entire United States in the entire 20th century. Most of this cement went, unsurprisingly, to building cities. On the right is a few Asian mobile communication giants who have defeated old Western brands such as Nokia, Motorola, and Ericsson. They are still competing head-to-head with Apple around the world, but hey, even Apple has all its iPhones made in Asia. Is there any similarity between the Industrial Revolution on the left and the Digital Revolution on the right? Compare the urban apples with the mobile oranges. Both creates millions and millions of working class jobs. And from there, working class families, working class communities, working class networks now mobilized. But these new working classes in the making, as we all know, live in the shadow of socially irresponsible corporations. From worker suicide at Foxconn to occupational disease at Samsung. Here is the cover of the Wired magazine featuring Foxconn in China, which churns out about half of the world's electronic gadgets each year. On the right is a new Korean film, Empire of Shame, and you know what that corporation is. These are the people whose labor power our double great leap forward has to depend on. They are not only huge in size, but the injustice they endure, the oppression they face, would not quite fit the glittering image of the great Asian cities of the 21st century. Instead, the issues they face, low pay, long work hours, child labor, no rights to organize, may appear more 19th century, may read more like the urban conditions in the city and the grassroots. 19th century Europe also had its double great leap forward without the mobile, which was accompanied by a profound and long-lasting shift towards Eurocentrism in technological and intellectual geopolitics. That shift still constrains us today. That shift explains the troubling finding from Clemenceau yesterday about the absence of top-cited CCR publications from the Global South. The question is the pendulum starting to swing the other way? Yes, hypothesized Ito, Okabe, and Matsuda, whose book on the mobile phone in Japanese life came out in 2006. This was not only the first volume analyzing mobiles and urban society in Asia, the opening chapter also explicitly raised this key question about quote-unquote technological and intellectual geopolitics, inspiring my thinking these past 9 years. Like Ito and colleagues, I am firmly against the idea of creating an Asia-centrism to substitute Eurocentrism. Rather, I'd like to pose some questions, both empirical and epistemological. Is the ground shifting again under the feet of urban societies in the Asia-Pacific? Does the rise of this region as a global epicenter of mobile communication industry and of socio-political mobilization induce and inhibit new and old conflictive processes in the city and the grassroots? Can intellectual engagement with these questions become a cradle of a less hegemonic structure of CCR knowledge production? These are big ideas that I will dissect by sharing 4 sets of tentative questions. Before doing so, let me say upfront that my questions will be posed primarily to urban social movement events. Not really the nation state, not really the media systems or even subsystems. To get answers, we will need an Asia-Pacific events database to start with. How will that database look like? I don't know exactly. Although in the past, I have tried twice at model building for this purpose. One is the 4 dimensions on the left I used to compare mobilization in the People Power 2 movement of the Philippines and the Nosamo movement of South Korea. The other is a database for new media events in China. Neither of these is good enough because they were designed mostly for description and archiving. It was easy, even boring, to fill the blanks. But I was not, more important, I was not asking myself, what are the more interesting and most compelling CCR questions? It is to this goal that I shall organize my preliminary thoughts below as 4 sets of questions. First, is there really the rise of mobile informational cities in the Asia-Pacific? Whose city? Is the rise sustainable, or is it precarious, contingent, and instrumental? Does it contribute to collective prosperity, more fairness for the majority working people at the grassroots, rather than the minority elite of the city? As Yue Zhizhao asked in her political economy analysis, after mobiles, what? The diffusion of mobile devices in China, and I'd say the region as well, has been highly uneven. The booming post-industrial districts of Shanghai, Singapore, and Mumbai are more of an exception in Asia's urban landscape, where the chimneys of industrialization still dominates a larger part of the skyline. Still, many urban communities are neither post-industrial nor industrializing. The rust belts of northeast China, the slums of Calcutta, and of course, Pyongyang, a city of 2.5 million people, where mobile penetration remained the lowest in the world. Myanmar is the world's second least mobile penetrated society. There, like in many other traditional societies, it is the religious elite who became early adopters of mobile phones. In this case, camera phones. This highly variegated landscape across the region, across class boundaries, has to be taken into account where we built our events database. The assumption is patterns of informational needs and of mobilization vary at different stages of industrialization and urbanization, which is a key feature of Asia-Pacific today when we compare the region overall to other contemporary world regions. Second, are there more public engagement among and beyond mobile-equipped grassroots people, especially the working classes, old and new? What about connections between different types of labor, material and immaterial, knowledge workers and mobile gamers, hackers and makers, even Facebook labor? How can multiple voices converge to win the hearts and minds of the information have less, paving the way for meaningful action? I'm going to skip the action part, okay? But those of you who want my, script, I can share this script. Question set 3 is, what prevents the new public sphere of mobilization from being re-feudalized by either governments and or corporations? How could they resist elite domination through entertainment and consumerism, as well as nationalism and populism? Do mobile media make clandestine organizing more difficult? What is the role of the state, especially local state of the city? And here I want to call attention to people looking at activism, only look at usually the leftist side, the so-called progressives. But I want people to pay attention to the conservatives, and the right-wing activism is also very visible in this region. And then is mobilization transcending 20th century party politics? Could these new working classes in the making embrace the diversity of occupation, genders, ethnicity, religious beliefs, and regional identities? Can the technological diffusion bring more benefits to the grassroots in an ecological way than Asia's great social transformations of the past? Here I want people to remember the fundamental social revolutions happened in China, India, across Asia, in the post-colonial era, and also historicize our assessment of the movement effect through more long durée comparison. And so to conclude, I'd like to invite considerations of CCR on an urban and interurban scale, whose default unit of comparison is not the country, not the political party, not the city even, but the event of the movement, which may happen in one urban district or involving multiple cities, like in the Arab Spring. As such, can we see Hong Kong's umbrella movement, Taiwan's sunflower movement, not as two units, but as one interurban event, or a pair of twin events? This may be worth pondering. Another point is to bring class back in when we push CCR to the next level, but this is no longer the working class of the 19th century. It's a new set of working classes in the digital era, much more diverse and autonomous, hopefully more intersectional and inclusive. There is no better place to ask and explore these questions than the Asia Pacific, where the double great leap forward of industrial and informational revolution is occurring on such a massive scale with so profound change on the work and life of grassroots people. In so doing, we have to be keenly aware that we are not turning our field, our city, into just another place for comparative data collection, another test ground of Western concepts. We have to see this region as a gold mine of theoretical production and methodological breakthrough, from where we can make the scholarly landscape of CCR less hegemonic, more democratic. This is more than a task for Asians, but for CCR scholars the world over, including particularly graduate students in this room. Change in the intellectual geography of geopolitics of CCR is in the air. Can the rising power of the East become a lasting asset of the South? This is my last question, an invitation to rethink the larger picture of what we do in CCR, why we do it, and how we do it, in light of the city and the grassroots now mobilized in the Asia Pacific. This is not a research question, but a call of history. It can be an intellectual movement too, not only in this region, but globally. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Professor Jack Chu, for the presentation. Our last presenter is Professor Maria Giorgio. She is an associate professor and deputy head at the Department of Media and Communication at the London School of Economics and Political Science from the United Kingdom. The title of paper is Media and the City, Urbanizing Communication, Communicating the Urban.
Okay, thank you. Thank you very much. I'm delighted that Jack gave me ammunition. 1, not to use any numbers, 2, to talk about the city, and 3, to talk about possible units of analysis which are not media or media-centric. So here I am talking about the city and talking about media in the city in a context that I would claim that contributes to thinking comparatively, but to also thinking globally, as Bill suggested earlier, from an interdisciplinary perspective. So there won't be too much of the media here, there won't be too much of media theory, but there will be a claim that we can actually think across the social sciences and think across possibilities of new units of analysis. And I will argue that perhaps the city can be our location, the unit of analysis, or even to push it further and to destabilize or deconstruct some of our given categories, to think that our units of analysis could even be things or concepts like cosmopolitan imagination. So in this paper, I am offering again a thinking piece, not as mature as Jack's, I have to admit, but a thinking piece about how to think comparatively and globally through my journey between doing comparative research transnationally and within larger projects, especially cross-European, thinking across my work transnationally in research across cities, work that I've done between London and New York and London and LA recently with some of Jack's former colleagues, but also thinking and importantly, fitting into this larger scale research what I've learned from very small scale grounded research in the very small locations that go down to the neighborhood of the city. So what I'm trying to do here is to deal with some of the ills of methodological nationalism that Beck, the late Ulrich Beck invites us to think about, contribute perhaps to thinking about methodological cosmopolitanism. And even though I don't really quite follow Beck's conceptual direction in the way that he thinks about cosmopolitanism, I'm using some of his language and some of the tools that he offers us to think about a changing world, and a changing world that surpasses the media, but very much is informed by media and communication processes. So I'm locating this piece in the city, and I am still very surprised how little of our work in media and communications deals with the city. Taking that, I mean, you know, there isn't a better place to make this claim than the place where we are. Our world is becoming increasingly urban. More than 50% of the world population lives in cities. And here we are doing so little about cities, having so little interest in cities. And urbanization of the world, of course, is a complex phenomenon and goes beyond mediation, but it is tightly linked to mediation. And it's tightly linked to mediation in many different ways, in the way that cultural industries, cultural creativity, and urban economy or trans-urban economy is organized, but also it goes all the way down to the organization of everyday life, the way that media consumption in our increasingly urban lives organizes our worlds, all the way to surveillance, of course, and the surveyed city and urban domains. So these conditions, I think, that are not entirely new, of course, we're not talking about an urban revolution, but an urban evolution, beg more than ever research on cities. And especially, I think, beg a cross-national and trans-urban understanding of the juncture of media and the city. The focus of my interest within these conditions that I recognize is the global city, what Saskia Sassen refers to as the centers of global command. And as certain cities at the top of global hierarchies reaffirm or increase their power, I'm particularly interested in thinking about how media and communications might play a role in the ways in which symbolic power, but of course also economic and political power, which will not be in the focus of what I will be talking about, but I'm interested in the way that media and communications contribute to channeling and organize all these different systems of power. I am going to briefly talk about the framework through which I think we should be perhaps being inspired or not thinking in relation to cross-national research in an urban context. And I'm going to talk briefly about this kind of framing because I think it can get quite boring in getting too involved in a methodological discussion. You can see more details about this proposal in my working paper, which is still a working paper, by the way. But I want to start by framing how I see doing research in an urban mediated world comparatively, and to then move to asking the question of cosmopolitan imagination, as I said, possibly as a unit of analysis, possibly as a problem-driven and conceptually driven approach to doing empirically research, which can then feed back into theory. And why I make this proposal? Because I think the cosmopolitanism has become both a condition that is observed in its different incarnations in our empirical studies, but it's also a problem that conceptually I think we're more and more interested in, precisely because it invites us to think the moral, political, and cultural implications of thinking globally, of thinking across boundaries, and consequently the consequences of thinking across boundaries in relation to the so what question. Why are we doing the research that we do? So I will have a lot to run through, and I apologize for the abstractions and the brevity of the arguments in advance, but obviously, hopefully we have time for discussion. So in the first part, I want to briefly frame the discussion about what kind of global comparative research I'm thinking about, the how-to, and then to move to discussing with some reference to empirical material this concept of cosmopolitan imagination, how it allows us to think comparatively, but how it allows us also to think that the break of the comparative has to be both horizontal and vertical within the universes. And to me, the universes we're looking at in this case are the cities. And to conclude with some very elementary thoughts about why this is a helpful direction to thinking about transnational comparative research. And I'm shifting between the cross-national and the transnational because I haven't settled this concept yet. So the confusion is there because the linguistic confusion is there because it reflects a real confusion. Okay, so three conditions that I think, three framing elements that inform this kind of urban orientation that I offer to thinking comparatively across boundaries. The first condition is something that, as I mentioned already, I think is something that that I feel we continue to ignore. The fact that perhaps there is a lot of significant and important work on the synergies between media and governments, media and political power, and this work is needed. There's much less work in some of the synergies that organize, I think, systems of power increasingly in the current context. And I locate this discussion within the current context because I think it's very important not to make generalization across time and space, but to think certain cities within systems of global hierarchies, thus the global cities here, to think of the neoliberal context that gives rise to this kind of synergies of power I've mentioning here, and of course to think about the growing mediation of our lives. So one of the points that I think we need to consider more systematically is the growth of the media and city synergies. Most of what we know about the cities we live in and the cities we consume, either as consumers, as visitors, as people who want to migrate or want to avoid certain cities, is mediated through popular culture, but also mediated through the various systems of communication that involve anything from governmental and corporate policies all the way to systems of surveillance. So cities are mediated, and in many ways cities need the media to organize their power, because this is the way that the cities increasingly become profitable and become products to consume. But also, I think it's important to recognize that media also need the cities. They need the cities because they provide the material for many of the products. You can see some of them, a very selective version of them on the screen. But it also provides cities become nodes in the organization of regional and global systems of communication flows that support exchanges of information, images, commodities, and narratives of the urban. So what we have, I argue, is a growing synergy that again invite us crucially to invite important so what questions about how power is channeled and organized in the global world that we occupy. So that's the big framing of the kind of comparative work I'm thinking about. And then I have two more points to raise here about thinking small and thinking big. So I think when we think comparatively, we often move immediately to thinking big. But I try to learn here from work on the ecology of communication, which has been very briefly addressed in various points today and yesterday. And the work, of course, of the Chicago School of Sociology, very influentially, that invites us to think about the ecosystems of the city. And in their ecosystem of the city, of course, media and communication are important, and they're not important just for making the city, but as importantly, say, for organizing systems of participation of citizens, of urban dwellers in social and economic life. And this ecological approach allows us to think of our locations of study or our units of analysis in their contradictions, complexities, and nuances that allows us then consequently to think about theory and how we can advance theory through our comparative work. And these nuances and contradictions that we can only understand when we think ecologically about media ecologies or urban ecologies is central to my aimed contribution here in thinking about cosmopolitan imagination, which is very much contradictory, fragmented, and in its different incarnations have different implications about the way that power and claims to power in the city is channeled and organized. think big, think small ecologically, think big globally. And global does not necessarily mean think big quantitatively. It can mean think big quantitatively, but it also, I think importantly, is to continue or increase our thinking about the dialectic between particularity and universalism, and between those, the dialectic between the local and the global. And very often we think that we have to start thinking big in comparative research by starting from scratch, but I argue that we need to build on social science and our media and communication research and take further what we know, not necessarily reinvent the wheel, but to think about the particular incarnation in our different cases of the dialectics between the universal and the particular, and the global and the local. And let me now move quickly to just give you an example, but also a key argument about how I think this kind of comparatively thinking orientation can work. And I am thinking here through cosmopolitanism. And the reason I'm thinking through cosmopolitanism is because cosmopolitanism, both as a phenomenon and as an object of study, is tightly linked to the global flows of people, ideas, and the media. My reference to cosmopolitanism here refers to the growing appropriation in different and contradictory forms of celebratory discourses of difference. And I'm going to look very briefly here to some of those contradictory appropriations of difference that in some cases they might reaffirm systems of power in place and urban and global hegemonies, and in some other cases they might destabilize them. So I'm talking about three different versions of cosmopolitan imagination that we see enacted in cities, and in cities through the close synergies between media and the city, what I call neoliberal cosmopolitanism, vernacular cosmopolitanism, and liberatory cosmopolitanism, with reference to David Harvey. So the reason that I can offer this approach is because I think about urban cultures, and this is also a transitionary piece to my next book on urban popular cultures. So I can think about urban media cultures through the nuances I have observed in the different layers of the city. So this is an ecological, I argue this is an ecological, globally oriented approach that allows us to observe phenomena that have cultural and political implications precisely as they emerge at the meeting of media and the city. I have here some illustrations that are comparative, and my comparative element here is primarily captured by the illustrations, but hopefully by the analysis proposed as well. So I'm talking about cosmopolitanism and cosmopolitan imagination as inspired especially by Delaunty and the way that he talks about cosmopolitan imagination as framing processes and cultural models by which the social world is constituted. So I have 1 minute to give you a taster of what I'm talking about in this kind of comparative framework. So if we look only, if we only think big and think across cities or across nations, we can see, and we do see, and there is research that sees the emergence of cosmopolitanism as a moral system, a political and cultural orientation. What happens if we think across and also within cities? What we see is the different expressions of cosmopolitanism. And again, I argue this is important because then we see the different consequences of what these different cosmopolitanisms mean. So there's something that we see across cities, especially global cities, which I call neoliberal cosmopolitanism, where we see incorporations of organic cultures of the city into very corporate projects. So graffiti here is the obvious form, adapted by the car industry in advertising, adapted by Levi's in creating organic cultural landscapes in the city that look nothing like advertising, but these are actually advertisements by Levi's in the city, using this very organic bottom-up creativity of the city that is organically linked to the histories of diversity, exclusion, and marginalization, but channeling it towards profit and maximizing profit. Alongside this, I'm sorry, I added these images last night, so I didn't do very good work with the headlines. Alongside this top-down neoliberal version of cosmopolitanism, we have what I called vernacular cosmopolitanism, inspired also by Nina Verbner's work. Vernacular cosmopolitanism is important, I think, here because it is the more messy, contradictory engagement of difference which comes out of cultural meetings and hybridities that we see in cities, and which relate to the possibility of democratized worldliness. So the idea that cosmopolitanism is not a quality that is associated or a value associated with a lifestyle. And what I'm using as illustration here is the hyperlocal media. Hyperlocal media celebrated largely as systems of horizontal, participatory, and direct democracy that enhance understanding, the ability to understand difference, and expand inclusive politics. And you can see here examples from a hyperlocal medium in London, where indeed we see a worldliness and a value of inclusiveness, which both incorporates the global in the local, but also offers a different kind of imagining of the local. However, and I don't have time to go in detail through that, but in the same hyperlocal media where we see the celebration of understanding and inclusive participation, we have also exclusive and quite exclusionary discourses about what kind of difference we are actually expected to incorporate in our global mediated and arguably participatory world of digital democracy. Alongside those, the idea of thinking about cosmopolitanism in these three different versions is again because it helps us understand what happens in the different forms of the meeting of media in the city, but also about what kind of politics might emerge that we can think again in a globally oriented way about the kind of politics that can emerge at the meeting of media in the city. And in movements like Occupy, the different versions of Occupy, as Harvey tells us, we can see the possibility of liberatory cosmopolitanism. And this is not a media movement itself, but as briefly mentioned by Jack and others, these are movements that incorporate media in different ways. So I don't have much time, and again, I did say that my concluding arguments are a bit elementary, but what I wanted to do in this very brief presentation is to push our thinking, to think about multiplicity. So let's think comparatively and globally about multiplicity, which is not easy to address, it's not neat, but perhaps offers us interesting intellectual journeys and possibly interesting ways to think about our empirical work grounded in specific places and across places, but also which can advance our theoretical understanding in media and communications. Thank you.
Thank you, Maria. Now all four presenters are finished their presentation. And next, our discussant will make comments on the paper. Today, and after that, we will have open the floor Q&A sessions. Today's discussant for the session is Professor Saskia Whitbourne. She is an associate professor at the School of Journalism and Communication at CUHK. Saskia.
All right. So thank you for all of your papers. I've been really excited, honestly, about this. And actually, with William Dutton's paper on page 73, I was still excited. So thank you for providing me the opportunity to throw out some thoughts. And I don't know how much time I have to respond to each individual paper, but let me start maybe with some concepts that through my eyes, kind of jumped at me and I found very interesting, and that maybe also engages with some of the panels that we have had yesterday. First off, in all of the papers we see something like the urban and the city as one of the concepts that comes up. And I think I would agree that we have to do more research on this and at the same time ask, what is the urban, what is the city actually? It seems to be defined still in rather geopolitical and cultural social terms. But if you look at a city like Hong Kong and Shenzhen and the greater Pearl River Delta, what kind of an urban space is that? It's still rather fractured, politically speaking, but we could still see it as an urban conglomerate. So that would be one of the questions that have come up for me. Also the idea of global digital spheres. So if we go away from the nation, and I think all of your papers make that argument, which I find very persuasive, then at the same time, we would also look at the practices. So how are these global digital spheres or spaces created? And that led me back, and I found that in all of your papers that you answered, I think, for me really well, why do we need to engage with comparative research? And one of the answers, and I'm obviously biased here, but one of the answers I saw in the papers is the idea of participation. That can be like through the systemic, through using a variety of these devices, but that can also be, of course, in Jack's paper, also through social movements. But what are these practices? So if the self backs, and here we have this kind of interesting binary, the self is back and takes over control, and at the same time we are controlled by the corporate or by the digital, by the Googles and so on. And I think I'm very interested in Dutton's final version of the device-free world. What do we make out of that? One of the things that also came back, and I think one of the things that kept these papers together was the emphasis on the empirical. The idea that we really do research from the ground up and ask questions that seem so banal on the one hand, but what is the city? What is democracy? What actually constitutes participation? And I think this is a very important question that I think each of the presenters actually might answer in different ways. One of the things that also came back to me, and also in Ingrid's paper, the idea of affect. We haven't talked that much about it, and it's sometimes talked about as this kind of soft approach, but aspirations, desires, and needs that actually drive a lot of the social movements today, that drive, again, coming back to what I said before, the need for many people to participate in decision-making in the city, whether this is getting rid of the people who want to take away your house in many tiny cities, or whether this is having your testimony online for whatever reason and present yourself. And also one of the things that came back to me was, of course, communication theorizing that we've been talking about for the past couple of days. And I think that is very important to really understand these complex interactions and geopolitical communication theorizing, because of course we all see an obvious bias that has also been addressed yesterday by some of the students. Briefly on each paper, and again there are so many concepts, so these were some of the important ones that I saw, and there are many, many more, so forgive me if I've not been able to do justice to all of them. So as I said in Muria's paper, the idea of, so why do we need comparative research? And again, I want to really push that question because I think we all have different answers to it, but I think it's important to even theorize that. Why are we doing this? the idea of participation and of representation. How does that work in different parts of the world? Also, the idea of top and down, bottom up mediations. There are ideas of the urban, of the mediated city. So if we assume that the city or the urban is mediated, then we have to talk, and discourse was an idea also and concept that came up. How is this discourse organized? How is this influenced? Issues that in Mira's paper came up was tolerance, hospitality, solidarity, and so on. What does that mean in each individual context? And I think it means many, many different things. In Hong Kong, you can live as a non-Chinese speaker for your entire life without speaking a word of Chinese, which of course goes back to the colonial history. In Europe, this is one of the major discussions. You have to speak the local language immediately. What does it mean for ideas of tolerance and hospitality and solidarity in the future? I think these are important questions. The idea of connectivity, of course, and mobility. What does mobility mean in all of these papers? Mobility of people, of information, and again, also of affect. I will talk later about this as well. The trope came up in Miria's paper, and again, she works very much with the assumption of the mediated city, and I think then we have to address that, because we all have these ideas of cities in our minds. The trope of, for instance, if you just think of Assange, and he is sitting in the Ecuadorian embassy in London, so he is kind of becomes a trope or figure for merging global politics, global information politics, civic action, subjective morals within an urban state and the nation within the nation. So I think they are very interesting interrelated ideas that we can talk about. Now, one of the things also, cosmopolitanism, this is a major concept. What about cosmopolitan narcissism? I think the idea of Hong Kong is trying to brand itself as a cosmopolitan or global city. What does that mean? Is it another branding exercise? Or does it really have real implications for people on the ground? Let me briefly turn to Jack's paper, and I think also his emphasis on histories when we engage in these comparisons are very important, obviously. And again, in relation histories and practice. Because again, the idea of representation of the urban and how we think about it, all of our perceptions, and if we again want to, and again, you know, this is maybe like a normative statement I make, but if we could want to think about how we participate in the creation of these transnational or matrix, how Ingrid puts it, spheres, if we want to participate in that, we are all, in a way, limited by our own perceptions and histories of discourse, meaning we have certain ideas about cities. Right? So in a way, when people think, when I ask my students about what do you think about India and Delhi, for instance, the first thing that comes up is, you know, rape, and it's scary. We are scared. If you think about Beijing, it's oftentimes pollution. Hong Kong, it's money. Calcutta, it's Mother Teresa. So we have these. What do we do with these imaginations, and how do they encourage interaction, solidarity, participation, and discourage us from this? So there's many more things, of course. Again, I cannot do justice to all of this, but again, the idea of creating these digital spheres of solidarity, and I think this is a major question for me. If something is happening, Occupy in New York and in Los Angeles, in Frankfurt and in Hong Kong, these are almost insulated events, and I think these events are very important to compare. And then what? If we want to create this theorizing again, how do people create these transnational, I use the word trans, that I know this is or these matrices of subjective cartographies that Ingrid has been talking about, these peer-to-peer networks. This is a major question, I think, how this is happening in the so-called virtual world. And this brings me actually again to the affective that stands out for me when Ingrid talks about deliberative practice and Habermas. Because again, I would say the affect is back, and more people pay attention to that. There's this nice book I really like, Nayar, and 2011. He talks about cultures of affect. And I think he talks about the cultures of aversion, the cultures of suffering, well-being, indignation. And that relates nicely, I think, to some of these papers, even though remotely for some people only, because we are all implicated in that. If social movements, Hong Kong or Philippines and so on, if something's happening in London, we put this online, then the question is, what does this visual testimony do for us? How do we engage in these signifiers and cultures of suffering and redemption? And how do we learn these practices of gaining attention eventually, because it is about gaining attention if you are not part of the local situated context. What does it mean? How will you tell your story in the future? Inge talked about testimony as well. Testimonies has become a big thing, but I think it's part of the culture of suffering that we like. We like the refugees in Europe because they kind of fit into our idea of suffering, but as soon as they demand political rights, we don't like them so much anymore. We don't like the redemption part of that, to use a slightly Christian metaphor here. So again, the question is, what do these cultural dominants, as Nayar calls them, in terms of aversion, suffering, well-being, do discourses of these digital spheres, of the idea of social movements, of labor rights, and so on. Briefly back also to William's paper. Hugely interesting because it gives you a good idea of where we are at the moment in terms of the devices people use and so on, and how that in a way diversifies actually our public spheres even more, and how it homogenizes them through the idea of course the Apples and the Googles, and how they streamline a lot of information for us. Again, the question comes back, what is urban space? What is the city, and how will we define that in the future to make these comparisons? What does communication and digitization in the city mean if communication happens with a machine? If we are governed by these algorithms? So again, coming back what I said at the beginning, the self as agent, but at the same time, we are governed by these algorithms. So if you at the moment kind of engage with all your mobile devices, to what degree actually do you know which pictures, which texts go out, and how it might be altered by certain algorithms like spear phishing and so on that we have in journalistic discourse? And one big issue that Willem has actually not talked too much here is the idea of security and trust. Again, if we go back to maybe participation, the city, social movements, history, this trust, I think, is something that we also have not theorized too much as a practice of how we engage in certain things of doing things, and I think that would be hugely important and interesting to have a comparison on trust. William in his paper also said that face-to-face communication is back. Because there is not this direct division anymore between online and offline. And so again, what do we do with issues of security and trust? And I think actually when you go to certain technological hacker conferences, they have much better answers than we do as communication scholars. I don't want to take up too much time of this, so just let me briefly wrap this up. The papers are slightly different, of course, in their approaches, but I do think they provide an interesting addition. It does not mean a complete alternative, but an addition to what some of the other papers have argued yesterday in terms of the nation and so on. But again, I would like to come back and maybe, can engage you in some of these discussions on putting the spotlight on some of these different units of analysis, like the city, like practice, like global digital spheres. And because I would like to have everybody have more time for questions, I will close for now, and I thank you very much for your papers.
Thank you, Saskia. So I'll open to floor for questions. If you have any questions, please to So, yes.
Maybe let me start the first one. I'm quite interested in Bill's presentation. And Bill, you talk about a society somehow in future will be deviceless. So I would like to know more what scenario would it look like and how it compares with McLuhan's idea of global village. And are we going back to a kind of oral culture? So I would like to learn more about this from you.
Do you want to take more questions?
Actually, no.
Okay. Okay.
I think that's better.
Okay. Okay. Well, no, that's, it could be a very scary future. I mean, the sense that privacy would be even more difficult to guard, and so security, trust, privacy would be a paramount concern. But and we wonder if it could be dealt with at all. But I mean, I think, you know, the idea that the global village is apt in one way. You know, that one of the issues with modern communications is that there's no place to go if you screw up. I mean, it used to be you could move and you could go west, and if you had a bad reputation, now you can't leave. So now anywhere in the world, you're as local as you would be in a village, and in that sense, it's true. And I think also that we're finding more and more that the internet is not replacing face-to-face communication. It's actually making face-to-face communication more important. So you can be where you need to be to do what you need to do. In other words, people go where they need to have face-to-face communication because everything else can be done online. And whether it's an oral culture, I mean, technically, you should be able to do anything you wish with a deviceless world, because you could have literally virtual devices. So you could still compose a paper or what have you, but you don't need to carry these devices with you. And it's hard to imagine, but I think, but yes, it probably would privilege the oral. And I think more and more you see, even now, with WeChat and WhatsApp and so forth, actually people are moving away from text and to oral communications and video communications. And so I think it may bring us back more and more to face-to-face and oral communications in a village atmosphere where privacy will be a key issue, and how do we deal with that?
Thank you. Professor Chen?
In Bill's presentation, you talk about the global, obviously the network. And then with Ingrid, you talk about public sphere. And I wonder, within the global, whether there would be comparisons of any kind or not, or it is just the global. That is the unit of analysis, for almost anything. And then if it is a network, then it can be used in different ways. The digital sphere, and then is the digital sphere very much national, or it is transnational? If it is very transnational, then the global is also the unit of analysis. So I would like you to comment on this. Whether there is something within global, or whether the global can be compared or not. Even though there is a network, supposedly global, but then, once it is used, then it is subject to contingencies. The social environment would matter very much. And then in that case, there is a variation. And then once there is a variation, then, comparison of some kind would be possible.
Yeah, let me just respond to that. First of all, I don't think there's the global. I think there are a zillion forms of perceptions of whatever is global. I also think that, well, the times have gone where we had global as such. So I think what happens today is what I tried to point out in my presentation, that we interact with peers across the world. You saw that Facebook chart and these fine lines, which have totally changed from what we had in these satellite patches earlier on, when we also thought this is now the global village. I mean, myself included, about CNN and all that. So those days are gone, and I think these two charts nicely show the pattern, the aesthetics of what we are dealing with. So when we talk about the global, or when you talk about the global, well, we need to be, I think, a bit careful, a bit more precise what we really mean. And I think in our field, maybe theorize more of what we mean. So how are these peer-to-peer connections changing the way we think about the world, how we think about the nation, how we think about civic identity? And by the way, what Saskia pointed out, well, it's the urban. Yes, I agree, it's the urban. But there is a lot of literature now coming out of so-called developing regions, India and so on and so forth, where they say, well, in 2014 articles, for example, where they say, well, a lot of research has been done about urban centers in developing regions, but now with these smartphones and all these new communication devices, they also changed how the rural communication works. And they're entering these rural scapes, which I think we haven't really addressed a lot, and not specifically, I mean, in our area, maybe in other disciplines. So I think when we talk about the global and globalized spheres, or in trying to identify spheres of comparison, I think what we should really do, and I tried to raise that yesterday, address that in more depth than what we saw in that chart I showed about the young people across these different regions of the world, thinking about themselves in some cases more like global citizens than national citizens. And in other cases, in Europe, for example, they think more about them as national citizens and less global citizens. So there are these new imbalances of how young people feel the world is connected. And I think that's quite different across the world, and it's different in a way which we haven't predicted, or which we are not addressing sufficiently, I think, in our research. So I think, yeah, these are the new forms of maybe comparison, where we need to carefully look at in depth how do people feel or perceive these new connections and spaces of connectivity. I can't phrase it in a different way, but I think these are the areas we really should address.
If I could be very brief, but I think in my view, I mean, I hate to say this because I can't explain it myself very well, but in a short period of time. But there was never a public sphere in my view. It was a romantic notion, and there is not one now. And in fact, it's going the opposite direction. And just because we have global systems of communication does not mean we communicate globally, or that we communicate with a larger public. In fact, we're becoming, in the short term and presently, I think we're more fragmented all the time. I mean, even people who are around me locally are saying, oh no, they're not on this system, they're on that system. They don't read email, they are only on Facebook, or they're even, so you can think of the phone system used to be centralized and national and so forth, but yet you could speak to 2 or 3 people that you speak to. You could create your network, and it could be a small niche. Doesn't mean we listen to the world. And so I really think we have to disentangle the fact that we have global systems of reaching around the world to who we actually network with, and I think it's becoming more increasingly fragmented, disconnected in many ways, and I think that that's probably, in the short term, that's the direction in which we seem to be retrograding towards more national boundaries, more interpersonal boundaries.
All right, Maria or Jack, do you want to add something to Joseph's question? No? You want to add? Okay, just a second. I think this is better.
I was intrigued by Jack Hsu's discussion of the mobilization of the working class, but can you give some concrete discussions of that? I see student movements in Hong Kong. I see sleepiness in Singapore. In North America, the Occupy movement really was symbolic and not very useful. So can you flesh out what you mean by the new working class developing? I love the idea.
Thank you, Barry. I want to emphasize that when I talk about this new class formation process, I try to emphasize is the working classes in the plural. Okay, no longer that's what I mean by the passing of the 19th century. Okay, working class that can be. Okay, and I would even argue, before Leninism, there are many ways that okay, I won't go too, but there could be more than one way to represent the working class besides the party politics, but. Coming back to the 21st century, okay, there's a article that has been widely discussed by Tsinghua professor Wang Hui. Okay, is talking about the new working class and the new poor. Okay, so in that conceptualization, the new working class are the Foxconn workers or Indian software engineers. Okay, some of them went to Sydney, okay, or even the UK, around the world, and so there's that old type of wage labor, okay, that has to be there in order for the mobile, or the ICT industry to run, both in terms of hardware and software. But at the same time, there's also the new poor, which are, theoretically, Wang Hui would include student protesters, from Hong Kong to Seoul, okay, to the Occupy in New York City, okay, into this. So they're highly educated, but then they don't have they already lost faith, okay, in the future development of a career of this neoliberalism system, and also they at the same time they have their many of them are digital natives. Okay, so they have very good digital skills. So these are the two broad types. Okay, and the second type I would include more of what people call immaterial labor, affective labor. Okay, labor. Okay, in that sense. Okay, so these are broad categories, and in terms of the income, okay, for example, although the second group, the new poor are more highly educated, but in terms of income, they are not necessarily higher, okay, than the people who are working in the sweatshops, okay, and in terms of again, solidarity politics. Okay, the new actually that's one of the main challenges that Wang Hui was pointing out, is that how could these two groups understand each other? Okay, or try to talk to each other even. Okay, and so that's the basic. Okay, but the specific, okay, compositions of these new working classes in the making. Okay, depending on has to depend on different urban conditions. Okay. Even in different Chinese cities, they can vary greatly, but roughly speaking, there are falling in these two, broad camps.
Okay, I'll take one more question. All right, go ahead.
Saskia, whatever the city is, it's a most dangerous place. It's always been that. If you want to be murdered, raped, or killed, or robbed, go to the city. Don't stay in the village. Cities have always been places of enormous bloodshed. And there's a great expectation that that will be even worse, with the visible, enormous disparate gaps between the Bronxification of cities and the Disneyfication of cities, the clashes between Jack's working class and the filthy rich. So it's a dangerous place. Now I wonder, Mirja, how are we going to combine Jack's world of devices, of non-devices, and Ingrid's world of Habermasian discursive communities in order to avoid this? How do we make the city in the future communicative? Because if we don't do that, people will kill each other by the hundreds of thousands.
Okay, wow. How do I solve the problem of millions killing each other? Well, Actually, my interest in the city came as a response, I think, to these fears and to many of the national fears. As we know, across many parts of the world, and with arguably the rise of various forms of terrorism, there has been a lot of debate, many debates about people clashing just because they're coming together, because they're so different and our ideologies and cultures are so different. So the phenomena we see is people killing each other or wanting to kill each other. Anybody who lives in cities realizes that actually you constantly are exposed to differences. And most of the time and most of the people live through this difference and have their tactics, even though very often with enormous cost, to live and survive and not kill others, even though they're quite different. So I think the city actually does not only represent the dystopia and the place of fear of difference, but to me, it actually represents the space of hope and the space of the empirical evidence that actually we can live with difference. My attempt to work through the concept of cosmopolitanism and to deconstruct it is precisely because I think we have to see both the possibilities and the challenges. So the possibility of living with difference, I think, is becoming more and more of a norm. Terrorism is the exception. Killing each other is the exception. So we all incorporate certain discourses and practices associated with cosmopolitanism, but we're not all in the same position. Certain people benefit from that, make money out of that. Certain people try to find tactics, often in contradictory ways, within the vernacular context. And certain people either try to find alternative politics or actually are on the receiving side of very superficial versions of cosmopolitanism. So what's the answer? Using more of the of the devices to organize movements that act towards a liberatory cosmopolitanism rather than a neoliberal cosmopolitanism. There is a manifesto.
Okay, because I think Saskia's question about AFACT is too important to ignore. Also because I skipped that part in my presentation precisely. Okay, so to me, I think, okay, if we come back, there are three layers, okay, we should think about. The first is to treat AFACT as important. I don't want to say AFACT is more important than news or hardcore advocacy, but they are as important. So we need to encourage. And I see in this room some of our students studying, umbrella movement. Okay, is working on, for example, social movement songs. Okay, or poetry, or street theater performance. And all these, things are what I mean to win. How to win people's hearts and minds. Okay, not just the media exposure. So that's one layer. So we need to have good data. Okay, on what becomes viral and widely. Not all the affective expressions have gone viral. Okay, most of them have not. But then which ones have gone viral? But then the second layer would be Jody Dean's critique. Okay, when these things, communicative capitalism, when these things move around, to what extent are we really helping the movement, or are we helping Facebook? Okay, so that's the second layer. But even those who are helping or getting into the movements become a very important force. Then there is the third layer, okay, which is, okay, we have to distinguish in the final analysis. Okay, some of them are ultra right, okay, are racist, okay, or sexist, okay, the old forms of ways to help the elite to divide or to dominate the grassroots. So I think there are three layers at least, okay, that we need to pay attention to the affective aspect.
All right. Thank you very much, all four presenters and our discussant, and thank you so much for participating in our session. It has been a great success, and we will have lunch at guest house, and transportation is going to be in front of our building, I guess. And thank you so much.